For women, it's often the nurses and the school teachers who adjust best to living in dementia facilities, and for the men, those from the armed forces. Nurses in particular adjust well because it's just like living at work when they're in a dementia facility, being used to the whole routine, the hierarchy, the medication rounds, the lot. And for school teachers, they adjust well because it's just like the classroom. When the activities are going on all day, press reading, etc., they join in just as they would in a classroom. So that's covered with them. And for the men who have been with the armed forces, they're used to living in the barracks with a group of people. And so in that way, they can adjust to another lot of people, albeit women at this time. It doesn't seem to bother them. But other than that, many people do have real difficulty adjusting to dementia facilities. And in particular, most people find it difficult coming initially into a dementia facility. But after a few months, if that support is there, and they can make a friend and they have a good setup in their room, etc., etc. Generally, in the first, 2 months, 3 months, it often takes for a person to settle down. And if they're particularly au fait with the environment, like nurses are, it's definitely easier because they are still in their environment, actually, aren't they? I mean, if someone falls over, they'll call out the nurse. If someone needs a glass of water, if they're, able to walk themselves, if they're independent in walking, they'll go and get them a glass of water. If someone's sick, they'll sit by them and comfort them. They continue their role in the dementia facility as they did when they were a nurse. So that's very sort of reassuring. And, it gives them a purpose. Actually, it's an important role. It's a very important role because if the nurses are busy, as they often are, and carers in the rooms, up in the corridors doing the cares and work, and there's no one in the lounge, which is often the case, nurses, former nurses, residents, definitely help out and call out, when there's a need. And also with school teachers, being used to the classroom and all the children for all those years, hour after hour, day after day, tremendously disciplined job that they'll sit in the activities with the newspaper reading or the workshop, whatever it is, and contribute just like they did in the classroom. So it's very not that different for them. And also the reason why school teachers and nurses can adjust so well, the women, is because they make friends easily with their own former career person. So for example, nurses will make friends with nurses and teachers will make friends with teachers. I mean, it's an easy fit. It's an easy mix. All of us in our own profession have our own way of communicating, similar background and all that. And so even if they just only speak a few words to each other, there's that similar interests often, similar background, similar tone, similar way of speaking, and similar way of viewing the world. The perspective and the way that they view the dementia unit will be very similar based on their background often. And so they can converse with that. And even if they're not conversing much, just sitting by each other, in the workshops or at the table, their manners, the culture, their background, often very similar, having spent a whole lifetime in that job. And so it's easier for them. Whereas for the men, it's much harder because, well, they're the minority, aren't they? If you've got a dementia facility of 30 people, then typically it will be, definitely the majority will be women, often up to 25, but say, 23 are women and only 7 are men, 10 at the most men. And so it's hard because there's less of a demographic. It's harder for them to get, if there's one farmer out of the 10, it's difficult to find another farmer. An accountant, difficult to find another accountant. Whereas if you've got 23, women, if you're one school teacher, chances are there'll be another school teacher because of the bigger demographic. So that's one reason. And the other thing is that men you know, they don't seem to settle the same in dementia facilities, you know. I mean, they, for the reason that because of the demographic, it's difficult to find someone of a like-minded career, like-minded interest. But even with that, also on top of that, they tend to roam a lot. It's harder for them to assimilate into the dementia facility. But there was, you know, and it is difficult. They tend to make friends more with the women in a general way rather than the men specifically. One example of this was a sergeant major who, say his name was Jack. He was amazing. He totally assimilated into the dementia unit. And he said it was because of being in the army that he could do that. And he explained that, you know, it's just like living in the barracks here, basically. You know, because you've got your own room, hardly anything in it, just like the barracks. You're living with a whole lot of people, just like the barracks. You get all your food done, your washing done, just like the barracks. To him, he used to say to the men when they got upset, there was this one man that used to get quite upset and would say, oh, I'm afraid of dying, I'm going to die, I'm afraid of dying. And Jack would just say, look, we're all going to die, mate, and this is the last post, so you better get used to it. And I mean, he didn't speak like that to the women, but he did to the men, and they just shut up completely after that. You know, he was so pragmatic. And he had a room which, God, there was practically nothing in it. Well, yeah, I mean, he had one brass clock, a good brass clock, because they always like to know the time, by his bedside table. And he had one little, what he used to call a fold-up photograph, and it was only about that size, and it had him of his, when he was younger in the army, all, you know, in his uniform, and one of his wife, I think probably the day they got married, him and his wife, or soon after. Basic wardrobe, that was it. Nothing else in the room. Nothing that spoke to comfort. He said, I'm fine, just like the barracks. He said, I don't want to put anything up on the walls because it'll just ruin them. And, you know, and in the barracks, we're just used to putting everything up in a pack, 5 minutes, and then off we go. So same here. Amazing. You know, I mean, he never complained of the cold. He never complained of the heat. He never complained of anything. And he'd lie on his bed, winter, summer, didn't matter what the temperature was. He'd never put a rug over him. He hardly ever wore a jersey or anything warm. He'd just lie on the bed and think. That's it. And he had a fabulous memory for past history. And I said to him, actually, you know, like, how is it that you can remember all these, you know, right back to ancient Greek times he could remember. He said, everything I learned in the army, history, mechanics, communication, warfare, the lot. You have to know a lot living in the army, and I learned a lot there. And he brought it all to the dementia unit, and he was so resilient, so strong, so well adjusted. And because of that, he could give to the rest of the dementia residents in a really supportive manner, which he did daily. If after his sort of hour of thinking on the bed after breakfast, he'd get up, walk down the corridor. It took half an hour for him to get from the bed, his bedroom, to the corridor, because, hello dearie, how are you? Shaking hands, pat on the back, good day, isn't it? And then he'd pass the nursing station, which was always crowded and often anguished women there crying out for their, you know, long lost sons and such like. And he'd just say, it's all right, dearie, don't worry, we're all here together. This is our home, this is our family. You know, it'll be a good day today, something like that. And with his reassuring, kind, loving manner, they would de-escalate. They would de-escalate so much more than, you know, than they would with anyone else, for sure. So that's the end of today. The two books, The Resident's Voice from a Dementia Unit and The Resident's Rise from a Dementia Unit, both in the website below the description, pietavalentine.com. And you can get actually all the 25 videos, basic setup videos for both books, both entering the unit, which is The Resident's Voice, and in the unit, Resident's Rise, all those videos are there without ads. So thank you for your supports and everything.